Welcome to another episode of Artworks for Teachers. I'm your host, Susan Riley. Hello, friend. I'm so glad that you're here. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Doug Goodkin. Now, if you're not familiar with Doug, that's okay. He flies under the radar. But what is amazing about Doug is that even though he flies under the radar of some things, he is still this monumental figure as a music educator. He has done a TED Talk. He has also participated in a recent documentary called The Secret Song, which actually documented his final year of teaching music education at the San Francisco School, which happened to be during the pandemic. So if we're going to be talking all about both of those things today, we're also going to deep dive into his approach to music using the ORF approach, which is gets a little specific, but honestly, it's so helpful to understand how we can bring music into our classrooms in various ways. And Doug is brilliant about breaking this down, as well as why it's important to be open to approaches such as this and thinking about how we can improvise and bring new, fresh perspectives into our classrooms, and that everybody is musical. So I cannot wait for you to listen to this interview. I hope that you get as many takeaway gems as I did after just 30 minutes of talking to this man about his 4-decade-long career. It's just impressive, and I'm so excited for you to hear it as well. So without further ado, here's Doug Goodkin. All right, well, welcome, Doug. I'm so glad that you could be here on the show today. So for anybody who may not know you yet, can you just give us a little bit of an overview about your background and your work for the last 4 decades?
I went to a college called Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and we had a guest teacher for one semester who was teaching music education via the ORF approach. And this was 1973. So ORF was only 5 years old as an official thing in the United States then. His name was Avon Gillespie. It was a fabulous class, and I loved it. But, I was in college, so it was just like, okay, that's fun. It wasn't like, my gosh, this is my life's work. But I came to San Francisco and I found myself volunteering at schools and trying to remember what we did in that class. I had these dittoed sheets with an outline of some of the material. Anyway, I kind of kicked around for 2 years like that, and I stumbled into an opportunity at a school where a parent had bought 6 ORF instruments and nobody at the school knew what to do with them. My girlfriend at that time was in her first year teaching art at that school, and she told me about it, and I said, can I come to a class? They were hired somebody to show the teachers how to use the instrument. So I said, well, can I come? I could use some refreshment. So I did, and luckily he was a terrible teacher, and they fired him. And so I said, well, I could give you a workshop based on what I did in college, and I did. And they said, what are you doing next year? And I said, well, I was going to maybe work at that school. And they said, why didn't you work at this school? So I did, and stayed there for 45 years.
Wow.
And my wife stayed there for 42 years, and my 2 daughters went there for 11 years each, and my second daughter just finished her 13th year as the 5th grade teacher at the school. So it's quite an unusual circumstance. It's called the San Francisco School. Began as a Montessori school in 1966, grew to a middle school. Preschool was Montessori, the elementary school was not. And then in the mid-'80s went on to the middle school. So a small place, about 250 kids, and from 3 years old to 8th grade. And for 15 years, I taught all those kids. And then through a whole other story, a man showed up at my doorstep and said, can I watch some classes? Can I keep watching? And can I help you teach someday? And his name was James Harding. And so he became a co-teacher of sorts. And then another woman who I had met at the ORF Institute in Salzburg joined us in 1996, Sofia Lopez-Ibor. And we both taught, the 3 of us taught together for the next 25 years, which was a very unusual circumstance because they're both brilliant teachers and both of them are internationally known as ORF teachers, and the three of us were there in one school. And it was a school that from the very beginning was an independent school in the best sense of the word, which means we were free from other people's bureaucracies and curriculums. And we were just all of us, not only the music program, but exploring, experimenting, trying out what worked, throwing out what didn't, following what did, always watching the children to see what seemed to serve them. And it worked beautifully. And ORF was a perfect addition to the school because that describes a lot about the ORF approach, the idea of exploration and trying things out and trusting your instincts. And through my work there, I got very interested in rituals and ceremonies and created this whole ceremonial calendar with music at the center that really, to this day, defines the school. So I retired from the school in 2020. I'm still teaching all sorts of places, but James Sophia have continued the program beautifully, and the rituals and ceremonies are continuing full force. And so it's a Cinderella story, really.
It's just not often that that happens, but when it does, what a special, special legacy. I want to dive deep a little bit into ORF a little bit, if you're okay with that,
Yeah,
because and our audience can handle it, because we focus a lot on arts integration and strategies and tools. As a music educator myself, that's my background and training. But my background was as a vocalist, so I went to Westminster Choir College. So
yeah.
a lot of my training is Kodai based. So, but we had a lot of classes in ORF and Dalcroze, and lots of different kind of methods to see what kind of methods would stick for each of us, which I appreciated. And so probably my second my neighbor to Kodai was probably ORF. Dalcroze is not my
Mm.
fan. But I'm curious, can you share with our audience what specifically you mean by the ORF approach,
Yeah.
what that looks like in music? And you talked about ORF instruments. For classroom teachers who may not know what that means or what that
Yeah.
is, can you talk a little bit about that and why you chose that method? Why that method you feel like works really well with kids?
First of all, I have the highest regard for both Kodai and Dalcroze. And, in my ideal world, every child would experience all three on some
Yeah,
level, because
yeah,
they all offer different things. But it is worthwhile to look at what makes them different. So Dalcroze came from somebody who was frustrated teaching university students who were just reading from the page and not feeling the music. So he got them away from the piano, away from the violin, said, sing the phrase, move the phrase, bring it more into your body, bring it into your voice. Now go back to the piano and or violin or whatever it may be. And so he had a very specific goal, is to make the mostly Western compositional repertoire more musical through these methods. Kodai had a very specific thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but his idea was to create music literacy in the Hungarian population through singing,
yep,
and so he did that masterfully, right? And
yep.
that continued to echo in the years and across geographical borders to everywhere they went. And Orff came from he's familiar with Dalcroze. I think Orff was a little bit before Kodai, but he just had a vision of what he called elemental composition. And he began working with dancers. These were like 18-year-old young women in an experimental school for dance education that was kind of called gymnastics, but it was really modern dance. And his vision matched the founder, Dorothy Gunther's vision of music and movement as one piece. So out of movement comes music, out of music comes movement. So Orff was the music teacher in that setting, and was really just getting the dancers to create music from their bodies, from simple percussion instruments, from their voice, and at first on piano, but he wasn't happy with the piano, and he stumbled into a xylophone sent to him from Africa, and it inspired him to have an instrument maker make instruments like this, or xylophones, basically, that were inspired from Africa, but also metallophones inspired from Indonesia and glockenspiels inspired from Germany, right?
Yeah.
So he created these what called Orff instruments and added the extra little bonus that you could take bars off and on to create different scales. And because the xylophone was really unknown in Western music education, except for Saint Saëns, a couple of little exceptions to that, Glockenspiel and Mozart was there, but it allowed for a completely experimental and new approach to composition that had no baggage to it. It wasn't like you had to make the xylophone sound like Chopin. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and also the xylophone was not friendly for reading because you can feel the keys. The mallets were far away, so it's still very difficult to read playing a mallet instrument. Not impossible, but that steered things more toward the ear, more towards listening, and more towards understanding on the keyboard arrangement how patterns worked and so on. So the Orff instruments are a unique part about orchestral work because it's really the only child-sized orchestra that exists in all of the alternative education. I mean, Suzuki has violin, but you have to practice and learn that technique. But the xylophone is very technically friendly, so that somebody who has no musical background, formal musical background, can create some wonderful music
Oh, yeah.
because it's very simple. I mean, there is technique to play it well, but
Sure.
still, it's very simple. You don't have to go home and practice for an hour in a day. So that's one of the things that attracted me is this unique child orchestra that allowed you to create music in all sorts of styles and also which became obvious to me as I became more interested in applying the instruments to jazz and what we called world music.
Yes.
Because the instruments already came from a world music perspective from Africa, Indonesia, and Europe. They were very friendly. They are very friendly to play Zimbabwe, marimba music or Ghana music or music from Uganda or from Bali or similar instruments like steel drums or Mexican marimba, Afro-Colombian marimba. So there's a wonderful foundation on the instruments for a world music foundation that was very attractive to me. Kodai and Dalcroze feel more European oriented to me, but this opened up the world a little bit wider. Plus, all the percussion instruments that Orff teachers use are from other cultures. There's agogo bells and shakers and scrapers and woodblocks from China and cymbals from Turkey and tom toms, and it's already connected to world music instruments through the percussion instruments. And then the use of the recorder is likewise the flute or the whistle and the drum is the oldest human instrumental combination. So, and not to mention the voice and the body percussion and movement. And so that was attractive to me. It felt like it opened the possibilities of musical expression much wider
Mm,
in a way that was very, very attractive to me.
good.
I think the other thing that really appealed to me is the feeling of play,
Mm,
like the playful feeling of, first of all, like children's games is a huge part, for me at least,
yes.
of the Orff experience, but also a playful approach, like just having fun, trying things out. Ah, that didn't work. Let's try this. Let's try this.
Yeah.
And, not having to be so serious about you play that note wrong. That's not going to go well in the concert. And you go home and practice. No, nobody practices at home. They don't have work instruments at home. For a while, I made kids practice recorder, but I realized that it wasn't really making them any better recorder players, and just was another thing they had to do in their days. So I let that go, and it's amazing what they could do just by playing once or twice a week in the music classroom. So I would say that the breadth of medias like the body percussion, the speech, the org instruments, the xylophones, the movement, the folk dance was
Yeah.
something that really was and is attractive to me, as well as the emphasis on the ear and the body and improvisation and choreography and composition and this exploration.
And also all of those things can be, and we talk about integration all the time. All of those things integrate across every other area that we're working on. I mean, with
Absolutely.
math and science and social, I mean, they all work together. You're just using those skills in a different way when you're playing orff instruments. And I hope that people can kind of get this, if they can think back to their elementary experience and think back to those instruments that had the long wooden bars or the glockenspiels. Those are what
Yeah,
we're talking about with the orff instruments. And what I really love about orff instruments is that you could take the bars off. And so
exactly.
you can make a pentatonic scale, which is going to sound beautiful no matter what you're playing.
Yeah,
And so and again, to your point, it makes it almost you can't make a mistake. You can't make a, you can't be wrong, right?
yeah,
You can just continue to play and experiment and see what works and how to do that in combination with others as well as by yourself, which is a wonderful skill again to contribute. And I wonder how did, because watching your TED talk, I kind of got an idea that you are that you love improvisation and that jazz
mhm,
has become a part of that. And I can kind of see how that would be a part of the Orff approach as well. How has improvisation in jazz really impacted who you are as an educator and how you teach?
yeah. Yeah, well, jazz is, I think, one of the deepest dives into improvisation of almost any musical style. But
Mm,
many musical styles have all sorts of levels of improvisation, from Indian raga to, bluegrass or rock and roll,
yeah.
Um, but jazz, it's really the center of the experience because nobody's interested that you play the song exactly the way Gershwin played it, and nobody's interested in that you copy the way that Art Tatum improvised on it because you can't, by the way. But but that the idea is to make it your own. Also, nobody's interested that you played it tomorrow the same way you played it yesterday. So improvisation is the very authentic experience of bringing your whole self to the music and who you are in that moment, which is who you are as a person and who you are as a musician. From my point of view, is not a noun. You're not a thing that this is my identity. It's a verb. It's a constantly changing and flowing kind of process. And so jazz is the practice of revealing that moment in time, the moment you stepped into that stream,
Yeah.
and you're never going to step into that same river the same way twice. Uh, but you are completely authentic in that moment, responding to everything you know. I did write a whole article about improvisation, and I almost came up with the definition, which is uh, here it is in this Orff Echo. Improvisation is the art of responding in the moment to what the situation demands, musically and otherwise, drawing from all previous knowledge and experience. It is the act of discovering both what you know and what you didn't know that you know, but until you tried that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so I think that's a pretty good definition, and it means that you are fully present and you are fully alive to the moment, and you're not just depending upon what you did yesterday. Like you are really this ongoing kind of work in progress that I just appreciate as a model for human beings,
Mm,
and
yes.
for I mean, the other thing about improvisation is that so much of the problems that we have, musical and otherwise, is trying to solve a new situation with an old strategy.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. We can see it everywhere. in our country and in the world, people trying the same old thing that's not working, which is the definition of insanity, doing the
Indeed.
whole same thing over and over again and expecting different results, you know? So
Right.
improvisation in a very broad sense is really how we survived as human beings because we had to continually adapt and improvise our way through different conditions, you know, climate conditions, political conditions, you know, all evolution and conditions. So for me, improvisation is not a little luxury on the side that only jazz musicians do, but it's something that is essential to our actual survival. That
Mm,
article is called Improvisation, the Pleasure of Survival,
mm,
because it's training ourselves to meet each situation with the full measure of our intelligence and our feeling. And that's that, whether it's musical or otherwise, that's exactly what we're doing. And it does demand preparation. You know, you do have to do some concrete work and, you know, learn how to dot the I's and cross the T's. But in the moment of improvisation, every jazz musician will testify, you forget about it, you know, and you just let everything you've done come forth and speak for itself.
yeah, absolutely. So speaking of your TED Talk and thinking about this, one of the things that struck me most in that talk, and I want to get this right, was that your belief that everyone is musical and that as
Yeah,
educators, we're just drawing out that which we already have. So I would
exactly.
love for you to expand on that for our listeners because I think that's a really powerful statement. So many of
Yeah,
our teachers think, I can't bring music into my classroom. I'm not a musician. I
right.
can't do that. I can't sing. I'm not. So I think it's really important for them to hear from you why that's not true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first thing is people have a very narrow definition of music, a very narrow concept of music, which means you choose an instrument, you know, you learn how to read and write notes that somebody wrote a long time ago. You go take a lesson with a teacher who tells you yes, no, or maybe so, and you practice a lot when you'd rather be out riding your bike or playing baseball, whatever you know. So that's the people's concept of musicianship. But if musicianship is expanded to much wider and much simpler ways of expressing yourself musically, people discover, oh, I'm more musical than I thought. So, for example, with the hard thing about the TED Talk was it was very short, and it was almost the only talk I gave like that where we didn't do something first. We always do
Yes.
something first, right?
Yeah.
But you know, if we had an opportunity to do a 5 minute thing like I do a little thing with sitting postures. And so we learn a little rhyme like crisscross applesauce, crisscross applesauce, crisscross applesauce, pepperoni pizza. Can everybody do that? Yes, you can. All right. Can you, what if you're groggy? Then you're going to use a low voice. Excited, then you're going to use a high voice. What if you combine the voices? Crisscross applesauce, crisscross applesauce, crisscross applesauce, pepperoni pizza. Could you do that? Yes, you could. How did it sound? Not bad. All right. How about patting on crisscross, clapping on applesauce, and you know, stamping your feet? So now you have boom, 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 boom. And could
Right.
you do that? Yes, you could. All right. So how about we do it in two parts? Let's do it as a round. Let's do it as a round. Let's do it in four parts. Come in sooner. Crisscross, criss, 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 criss. And you know, within 10 minutes, you have this really pretty exciting piece of music. And at the end, it's like, did you do it? Were you successful? Was it musical? Boom.
Right.
I proved my point. You are musical. You just didn't have the right idea about what music means or the right way to get to it, which is much simpler than all the other things.
Yes. We also call it the access point, but recognizing, and I think to your point, we have a heartbeat, right? Everybody has a rhythm. Everybody is walking around as a musical instrument.
And the other way to kind of prove that point is the name of this movie that was made about me
Yes.
called The Secret Song. And I'm glad I had that title because it's a little activity I do with 5 year olds, but it's a playground. Just go play, you know. But
Yep.
what you have to do is understand that inside of this bars of wood is a secret song that's buried and waiting for you to discover it.
Yeah.
And all you have to do to discover it is put your hands on the mallets and try to lift it out of the instrument and then listen and notice when the song has come to you.
Mm.
Because if you just go blah, 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 yeah, that's nothing. But if you go blah, 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 boom, 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 boom. Oh, I think the secret song is coming up, you know. See if you can remember, you know, follow it and see if you can remember what you did and then come back and share it. So I send the kids off into the corner and I just say, go. And they come back with fantastic things. You know, so they are musical composers. Not only they're musical, they're composers from the very beginning without a single lesson, right?
Yes.
Um, and you know, I have some video documentation of what kids come up with, and it's amazing. So it just is a game changer, you know, that idea.
Yes, and I think, and so for those people who weren't didn't quite catch that, there is a documentary out about Doug and his final year of teaching, and it's called The Secret Song. It's streaming on PBS. You can go find it. I happened to watch it. It is so inspiring, and it brought back so many memories for me of teaching music to young children, and it's a breath of fresh air. One thing that I did notice though was that it just happened while COVID-19 kind of
Yeah, yeah,
hopped in, right? And you had to navigate teaching music online, which I
yeah.
God bless you. I don't know how you do that. So, um, what was the most challenging thing about that? And maybe also, what was most successful that was surprising to you about that?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I came from a school parent who had never made a film in her life before. You know, talk about
Wow.
that kind of can-do confidence and just let's try this out, see what happens.
Yeah.
So she just wanted to document some things before I left, and none of us could have predicted, of course, COVID and everything else that happened. But she ended up following me around and my colleagues, James and Sophia, who were an integral part of the film. The
Yeah.
work is really, the movie's you know, spurred on by me leaving, but it's really about the program that we all created. But the she had like 150 hours over 2 years that got whittled down to 90 minutes.
Whew.
So you know, for me, having that film crew just around all the time was just such a wonderful way to know that somebody was witnessing the constant miracles that happen in a music class, the
Yeah.
little breakthroughs of this kid and that kid, and you know the funny, quirky things that happen. And you know, they of course they can only show a teeny bit of it in the film, but what they show is really really sweet. Um, and then not only to for them to witness it, so after the class I could say, "Whoa, did you see that?" You know, but also to know that some of it would be shared, and that what people would see is happy children
Yeah.
and fearless children, you know, children willing to take risks, you know, children willing to connect with each other, confident children who are free to just say, you know, when you did this, I did the opposite of you. And you know, and then I have to respond, actually, that's a good idea because the two things together make something more interesting, you know? So that kind of very real, on the spot kind of ping pong game that I consider excellent education. Teacher
Yes.
goes ping, the student goes pong, the game is on, right?
Yes.
So then to the COVID thing, the ping pong game, you can't play very well through a screen,
Mm.
you know?
Very true.
So it was a nightmare, you know. I mean, and as I say in the film, I had to learn six different things, you know, technologies that is not my strong suit because I don't care about that much, you know. But I had to do what I had to do, and I think so. You know, it's like playing, you know, teaching that way was like playing piano with gloves on, but actually. No, it's like playing piano with mittens on. You know, it's really, really thick mittens. You
Yeah.
know, it's horrendous because you know you can't play that ping pong game. Sophia in that movie says such a beautiful uh, moment where she says, I can't see them, I can't touch them, I can't smell them, I didn't help them untie their shoes, that's what the real teaching is. This is just a holding pattern. And, she was so deeply distraught, as were we all, that when you're on the other screen, you're like an entertainer, you know.
Yeah.
But education is not entertainment, and even though a lot of people are thinking in those terms,
Yeah.
education is that live interaction between the living, breathing student and the
Yeah.
living, breathing teacher. So, I mean, I would say that there was nothing I learned that said, "Oh, I'm going to use these screens more when COVID's over." No, it's the exact opposite. But except for some things, I mean, like I taught a jazz history course to adults, and that was possible because I could, tell about the history. I could show videos. I could play piano, and then I could reach people who couldn't come all the way to my jazz course, in
Yeah.
person. And so, there was some benefit to that. But especially with the children, we have to get them away from those screens.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and it's such a huge disappointment that when it was over, I thought that was one of the big lessons we could learn. That was horrible. Let's put these things away until we need them, or until the screen can do something that I can't do live, like
Yeah.
show Dizzy Gillespie and Louis Armstrong on the Jackie Gleason show, right? That's a good use of the screen. Watching the secret song, that's a good use of the screen, right? But not for teaching. But I guess the last thing I would say is that it was amazing that if it was a choice between not doing anything with those kids and doing the screens,
Mm.
it did mean something to the kids and myself to see each other,
Yes.
even in those little dots,
Yes.
and just that even through the most challenging of screen in terms of like a screen between things, is a good double use of that word,
Mm.
but that something still connected, and it only connected because we had already had the live experience and the muscle memory was there.
Right.
There was a brief time at the beginning where I thought, the 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, they can't do this by themselves. So the parents have to be with them. And now their parents are going to get to see what we do. And I said, okay, do this clapping play with your parent. Okay, dance down the hall with your parent. And that lasted for about 3 classes. And the parents were saying, I'm too busy, kids, just push that button. You got to figure it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the short story.
Oh my goodness. Well, before we head out, there's a question that I always ask everyone on the show, and I think I'm very excited to hear what your answer is going to be. From your experience, how can creativity impact education today?
Well, creativity is the final exam of everything, and
Mhm.
not just in music. Everybody thinks the test says, "Oh, check off the right answers, and the computer corrects it, and oh, okay, you're done." And we all know what that's like. You get 100 on the history test, and you forget it 5 minutes later, right? But creativity is when you take everything you know and you work it and you do something with it. And that's true in all subjects. So the science fair, for example, that's a great thing where kids choose a project and they also have some agency when they get to choose what they're interested in. They choose a project and they study it and they figure out how they're going to present it and how they're going to do it. Is an excellent example. Or math class, make up your own math problems,
Yeah.
or PE, make up a new game with 3 balls, whatever it is. Certainly writing, you write a novel, write a short story, write a poem, and certainly music in the Orff approach, create a composition, create a choreography for the piece. Let's improvise this scene in the play in the way that you feel it, and then we'll put it down into a script later on. So all these things are the things that are motivating to kids, exciting to kids, and but it's not just fun for them. It's actually the deepest learning, and it's the most memorable.
Mm.
Nobody's going to tell you about their math sheet that they got 100 on in 3rd grade, but they will tell you about their science fair project that they'll never forget, or their history study where they got to study the history of chocolate, whatever, and present something about that. So this kind of project-based learning that requires some creative agency is, we've known this for a long time, but we just forget it day after day after day
Yeah.
and just go back to the same old stuff that never worked in the first place. Again, the definition of insanity.
So, Doug, where can people learn more and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so it's just douggoodkin.com is probably the
Perfect.
easiest way to do that. One more thing about getting in touch. I am doing two courses this summer and there's still room.
Oh,
One is
perfect.
only in, well, one is only in 7 days, but or 12 days, but a jazz course in New Orleans, jazz 24/7 in the place where it was born. Uh,
Yeah.
Everybody, not you don't have to be even a teacher, but for a teacher who doesn't know jazz, for a jazz musician who doesn't know much about teaching, and then the level courses that I'm in charge of this San Francisco International ORF course, and that's at sforf.org. So those are two other ways to get in touch.
Wonderful. And we'll put that in the show notes as well so that people can quickly find you and get in touch.
Can I give a closing quote? Do we have
Please do.
30
Yes.
more seconds?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Because I mean, the one question that we didn't get to is, what do I say to somebody who said the arts are
Yes.
superfluous to education in the 21st century? And the first thing I said is, I'm so sad you're asking that question because it
I
means
know.
you didn't have a beautiful artistic experience, and your family, the neighbors, the school, the culture failed you. They didn't give you what you deserved, which is a deep experience in arts. That is something that every human being is owned. And so again, the pandemic was nature's way of telling us, go to your room, time out. You have to learn how to be better people, And one of the things that we learned in the pandemic is it's really terrible to feel lonely and cut off and isolated, right? And one of the beautiful moments of the pandemic was the people in Italy singing on their balconies. And
Yes.
so, hopefully you learned that music is what brings comfort and brings healing, brings beauty to our lives, and that is as way more important than anything else that you can try to convince me of that we learn in schools is those things. So in Victor Hugo's great classic Les Miserables, there's this little quote. Somebody says to this bishop, "You're always eager to make everything useful, but here is a useless plot of land. It would be much better to have salads here than bouquets of flowers." And the bishop replied, "You are mistaken. The beautiful is as useful as the useful." He added after a moment's pause, "Perhaps more so."
Thank you so much for joining me today. This was such a beautiful just conversation, and I love your perspective on
Yeah,
not
thank
just
you.
music, but on life in general. So thank you.